Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thanks again for joining me here. Hope you're having a phenomenal day. Happy Tuesday to you here. Not feeling 100%, so I may actually be taking it easy next couple days after today, but I want to get you a concrete update on what's going on. Not because of the head and shoulders pattern, but there was a lot of confluence at this resistance at 95.7K. There is also a reason why we took that short position, got 70% on our Bitcoin short from 97.4K, right? Because there's a lot of divergence at that point. The price action was starting to stall out, and we were able to get in on a good entry. So congrats to our community members for that. When it comes to Bitcoin though, right now, what we want to make sure to focus on today is the backend data here with not just order blocks. There's some pretty impressive numbers below the price, but also looking at the macro structure here and letting us know kind of where the price action might go next on the larger timeframes. Now, while that loads, the one thing I do want to kind of point out, and we'll talk on this here soon, is just this $86,000 target that essentially the market makers are likely going to be hitting next. Not saying we're going to see that right away per se, but I do think that it's a distinct probability. There's a lot of confluence there. I also posted this on our social media as well, if you're not familiar. There is a lot of evidence suggesting that if we lose 90,000, 86 to 87.5K is that next target, mainly because liquidation, but also the point of control value area low is at 87.5K, which is effectively right here below this fib level at 89.5 thousand. So we got this point of control as well as liquidation just below it. So I think we're just getting started. I think further downside makes more sense now that we're in this range, but you also got to recognize we're in a support range. We may see a dead cat bounce. We got a lot of fair value above the price. These are things we got to focus on here today. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. Without further ado, let's go for it. All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a quick look here at the backend data for Bitcoin and then just kind of quickly understand where we're going to be at for some specific altcoins. Keep in mind, most altcoins are looking pretty poor here today. They're moving about 2 to 3x of Bitcoin to the downside. That will likely slow down here soon once Bitcoin stops moving sporadically. But when we look at the order blocks, we can see there's not a ton of selling pressure above the price, more buying pressure below. So that kind of suggests that we're going to be going up in the short term. But if you look at the specific areas, we got 89.5K as a rough estimate there, and 86.5K with $60 million and then closer to about $100 million at that 86.5K range. So these are two pretty big areas there, right? Obviously, it's a big spread, but it's important to recognize that those are protected areas in a sense where people are trying to buy more. And when I say people, they're not people like you and I. These are probably larger organizations with significantly large order blocks. Keep in mind, those are order blocks in one exchange. It's not across the market, but it's still a good gauge of kind of where the areas of interest are. So, just below local liquidation, and of course, right there below that specifically large liquidation range, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. First thing first, let's actually look at the 24-hour period and look at here and recognize there's more liquidation on the upside than the downside here locally. Of course, that makes perfect sense. It does suggest that 93 to 94,000 is the potential next target area for Bitcoin. So I wouldn't be surprised we do see a bit of a rally there just based on that fair value gap being above the price and just kind of local liquidation having been swept for the most part. That chunk between 90 and 93,000 is gone, right? So anybody who had a long position with a liquidation event between 90 and 93K essentially is kind of a sitting pretty unfortunate right now. They're not very happy about it, and I would be too. But you got to be careful on these holiday weekend manipulative type of patterns, right? Even though we didn't really see a true dead cat bounce yesterday, the momentum was down, right? We got to continue to trust that direction until it decides to change. If you're going to take a long, insist on taking longs, make sure you just use tight margins. That's kind of the concept there. Anyway, 7-day time frame, most of that's gone. There's not a lot here locally. When we look at the macro, there's still a lot more to the downside. So just some key areas to focus on. 93.5K is above the price. That's a big chunk just above. And then down below, spread out between 89 and 86.5K, right? Right in between those two massive order blocks we just looked at. So that's kind of an area of confluence, leading me to believe that that's going to be our next support range and or the next target for the whales. When we come in here, let's go ahead and get a quick refresh. Fear and greed index is still on the low to neutral standpoint, kind of letting us know that, fear is getting shaken back into the market, and we're now on our downtrend for ETF net outflows. Generally speaking, we do see a kind of the good ebbs and flows, right? Generally, we see 3 or 4 red days, 3 or 4 green days to follow. So right now we are probably at about 2 or 3 red days because this is a delayed update. It doesn't show ETF net flow for yesterday yet. So that's kind of an unfortunate thing there. But for the most part, when we do look at the massive, areas of support and confluence, we are right there at that support range, or that support range held, right? The 89 to 90,000 K range held like a champ here just a moment ago when the price pulled back to that level, right? Once again, these do work a lot of times like a magnet. It's the best way to describe it, but it's also a support, okay? So with us being close to that level, it doesn't mean we can't go below it. It just suggests the first time we attempt it, we're not going to break it in most cases, which we saw happen already, okay? So that does mean that we keep knocking on that $90,000 door. 86 to 87.5K are the two areas of confluence that I feel we're going to see as the next step if that were to come to pass, right? A lot of this stuff is based on ifs and wins. We don't know truly any of that. The best thing we can do is kind of gauge the data that we see. And right now, short liquidation delta is high, telling us we have $14 billion more in short liquidation than long liquidation, suggesting that they could get squeezed out, sure, but also suggesting that the bears are in control and you don't want to try to long against that. Not saying you couldn't still find some profit between 90 and 93,000. I think that's our resistance range, 93 to 94K. But for the most part, when you see these things kind of like this here, moving in that direction, it's usually best not to trade against it. Future reference, we did short Bitcoin 5 days ago. We got a good 70% from 97,400 to the rough estimate of 90 to 91K, right? So good stuff in that regard. When we look at the actual time frame here, the daily time frame, we can recognize that we are seeing 3 significant red candles. Generally speaking, when you see 3 candles in one direction that are pretty significant, at least these are for Bitcoin, then a reversal or basically a doji candle is more likely. So I'm expecting us to see some flattening here in the 90,000 range, potentially with a short leg up there. But for the most part, the trend is down right now, so it's best not to try to take much in the way of long positions, more so specifically referring to altcoins because they're laying down right now. Most altcoins are not doing very well, okay? We're going to look at a couple of them here today just to kind of double check, but from a daily time frame standpoint, we've lost 50 on the RSI. We're broken, mostly bearish on the lower and somewhat larger time frames, right? So it doesn't mean we're going to zero. It just tells us that we need to be aware and more likely than not expect the price to pull back a bit further. Can still rally between now and then. I mean, we could even be in the throes of a really weird head and shoulders pattern on the larger timeframes, right? We could run back up to 94,000 and then right back down. I'll tell you what, right now, if we were to see 93 to 94K, I'm going to be really interested in considering a short there. Right now, it's hard to want to justify a short just at this key level support, that macro psychological support of 90,000. 4-hour time frame does also reflect where it is 6 on TD sequential, suggesting we may see about 4 more 4-hour candles, basically 12 to 16 more hours of continuation lower. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It doesn't always work out that way, but overextensions, when they occur, the price is usually more likely to bounce. This suggests that we're not fully overextended yet because we got a little bit of a reset here on that holiday, which was yesterday. All right. So overall, 90,000 is at local supports. Secondary to that, we got a CME gap here, just a friendly reminder, between 88.1 and 88.9K. Keep in mind, all that is available here on my Twitter, Telegram, and Discord. Primarily Twitter. I've been posting there a little bit more frequently, but there is information here kind of just letting you know where we're at with that. Anyways, focus on that if you want, or consider joining us over there. Things are getting a little more active. And when it comes to the 4-hour time frame, there's not much else to really note. We're pretty well overextended here, below 30 on the RSI, and then below 20 on the money flow index. So the truth is, stochastic starting to swing up. I think there's a good chance we do see a short-term relief rally. Keep in mind there's a fair value gap here at 92,000. So this is the range we want to kind of focus on for consideration of a take profit on a long or perhaps an entry on a short. 92.5 to 94K is that area of consideration for me, just kind of thinking outside the box right now. A lot can change between now and then, but that's an area I'm interested in, okay? Between now and then, for you, pump the brakes. It's all good. Try not to FOMO in. This is just normal standard trading stuff, okay? So there's nothing super outrageous here just because we saw 3 red days. It's a weekend, folks. Even though majority of weekends have been green, we're seeing this a pretty significant red weekend with a holiday and a lot of weird stuff going on fundamentally too. So those are my thoughts. What are yours? Why don't you comment below? I'd love to hear it. Thanks again for being a phenomenal part of my life. Let's take a look at the next one. All right, folks, quick look here at Ethereum, kind of see what's going on. We're in that low $3,000 range, kind of that area of interest that I was talking about with my community as far as entries I was considering for this week, as a matter of fact. So do I want to jump right in? yeah, the emotional side of me says yes, but the logical side says no. And I just mean it's maybe a little early. Of course, obviously, you never truly know. But between now and then, what we want to look at is just kind of how well or poorly Ethereum is doing versus Bitcoin, which looks like it's just falling off the edge of a cliff. Most altcoins are doing that. Bitcoin has been stabilizing and going sideways for a few hours before it pulled back. Ethereum didn't do that at all, right? So it tells me there's an inverse pairing, probably basically 2 or 3x to the downside pairing here for this coin, and it's not a good consideration for investment. And not to say investment isn't accurate, because 3,000 is kind of like that psychological support. Even though we could probably go lower, it's not a bad place to DCA, but I'm referring more so to like a leverage play. If we look at, I mean, look at how great the support range of 3,200 was. It meant nothing when Bitcoin lost its support range of 94,000, and it spent very little time there, okay? So it's all the more reason to just respect the market right now. We got $9 billion in short liquidation delta, telling us the bears are in control. Not proposing necessarily short right now, because we are entering that support range, but statistically, you're going to find more favorability with success taking a short position on this coin. Now, when we look at liquidation, let's actually quickly refresh this just to make sure. We look, majority of that liquidation has been hit there at 3,000. There's a little chunk left at 29.80. So for the most part, dead cat bounce would make perfect sense from here, just being overextended. Market makers are seeing a lot of shorts piling up, and it's more likely than not, we're going to see a little bit of a bounce, but that's going to require Bitcoin to not surpass 90,000. If we close below 90,000, I think we're just going to see absolute bedlam for a lot of altcoins. It's going to be bad news bears. Okay, so daily time frame, when we look here, there is a fair value gap above the price, 3,200 to 3,300 as a close approximate. There's also smaller time frame fair value gaps, but Bitcoin has them too. So it does not mean you take a long and you're going to have success. It just lets us know that that level will be filled at some point or another. Between now and then, we have diverted or essentially broken below that support of 50 in the RSI. It didn't take long at all. So this coin went from moderately bullish here, looking pretty strong versus Bitcoin, to a pretty ugly scenario here, to say the least, right? So it's in a position right now where we're probably going to see some waffling around in the 2,800 to 3,200 range. I'm spinning those numbers out there loosely because I remember 2,800 was an area of confluence previously. We're right there at that point of control at 3,050. We got a lot of volume support at 2,900. So it would make sense for the price to kind of try to figure things out, because it's kind of discovering this range here once more, right? Spent very little time here semi-recently because the price pumped up pretty hard back in what was like late December, early January. All right, so all that said, 4-hour time frame, significant divergences. We're massively overextended here. This coin's actually different because we have money flow index is lower on Bitcoin than the money flow index on Ethereum. What that basically tells us there's more propensity for this coin to go lower faster than Bitcoin, because we've had not as much money has flowed out of this coin versus Bitcoin, and it suggests there's more meat left on the bone to the downside essentially. So what I'm hoping to see here is a little bit of a dead cat bounce, 91, 92, at best 93, 94K for Bitcoin, and then consider some shorts at that level once those areas are tested. Between now and then, it's too risky to long, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to short at support. So once more, it's one of those sit on your hands kind of situations. I know it's a bummer. Most folks look to me to try to find good entries and good signals, which we do have. I mean, obviously we took some nice profits on our Bitcoin short or Solana short. This happened from trades we took Thursday and Saturday, somewhere in there. But I haven't taken much trades over the weekend because it was a holiday. And now right now we're dumping, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to try to catch a falling knife either. So I know it's not something you want to hear, but it's best to kind of hold off and see how these levels hold, or how they're responded to. The good news is 2,900 to 3,000 is that local area of support, depending on how far back you look, right? If we kind of just look from December till now, we're going to see the most amount of volume at that $3,000 support range, which we're in right now. So the likelihood of going tremendously lower for Ethereum is low, unless Bitcoin sees a massive fundamental catalyst and pushes down to 86K or lower. Obviously, breaking 90,000 is not going to be a good start, but it is definitely something to be mindful of. Anyways, I hope without being too wordy, this made sense to you. I'll make sure to post a new playout chart here on our social media, of course. Thanks again to those of you who have been actually active on there. I appreciate that very much. Specifically on X, trying to grow that. I've been focusing on that a lot, just because YouTube views are pretty low right now. People have very low engagement. All right. So anyway, that's just kind of how it goes. That's kind of the industry. And I hope that you have a good rest of your day. Thanks again so much for watching. Quick heads up to our traders. We got a 15% discount on trading fees if you use my link to register through Bitunix. Links down below in the description. All right, folks, let's take another look here at Solana, kind of see where we're at. We actually consolidated nicely at this 133 range, but lost that support level because Bitcoin continued to dump, and now we're just kind of free falling. So we're in a position right now where it's best to be patient, wait to see how this range holds first. I was very interested in a 128 to 130 range. You probably saw that on my Twitter and or, of course, our private Discord there, just kind of letting you know the areas of opportunity that I was looking for, right? Now, just because we're in that range doesn't mean I'm just going to FOMO into a long. I think this is kind of a bad scenario to try to just jump right into, even though we're seeing massive overextensions and pretty significant pullback. It's not really the kind of pullback I like to just buy into effectively, right? Now, Bitcoin is absorbing a lot of market capitalization and is essentially bottoming out here where most altcoins are bleeding out, money's flowing into stablecoin, and that's just generally not a favorable sign for altcoins. It's not to say that can't change, because that definitely will at some point, but between now and whenever that change occurs, we got to be cautious in taking longs on altcoins, okay? So just some friendly advice there. Be very careful when it comes to this range here. Obviously, we can see that 133, 134 held like a champ. That's when Bitcoin was doing kind of this over here. So we saw a nice little combination there where Bitcoin and Solana looked like they were working well together. But sincerely glad that we held off on taking a long. I was considering a long on Solana yesterday and wanted to wait a little bit longer because it was a holiday, right? Glad we did. We see this pretty significant dump and just really not worth the investment for the moment. So what I want to kind of drive home today isn't just telling you not to trade, but more so areas of opportunity. Where are we looking at taking a trade when those areas occur? Now, if I recall correctly, there was a CME gap at 125. Yeah, 125 to 126. That's a close approximate. It's like 50-cent range. It's not a heck of a lot, but it was a gap from basically the New Year's weekend, right? So all other gaps have been filled for most other coins, and we're just in a position right now where there's a solid chance that we see that since we're so close to it already, all right? Now let's look at liquidation and just recognize points of control here. Actually, we're just going to refresh all of these charts because I think they were loaded this morning before the pullback. There we go. We can see 134 as that point of control. So hypothetically, the price were to run up, right? We see a relief rally. That's probably going to be a place to see a rejection initially. Those are called dead cat bounces. Fair value gaps get filled at those points of control or those areas of open interest. And essentially, we see rejections there. So we want to presume 134 is the rough estimate of a new resistance for us. All that said, 3.5 billion for liquidation short delta. That's quite a lot for this coin. It usually averages somewhere between 2 to 3 billion. So it is overextended to the downside, suggesting a potential recovery, albeit probably pretty brief, but a slight relief rally is potential. There's not a lot of liquidation though locally here. Actually, this last 7 days. Let's actually zoom in a bit further. Let's look at the last 72 hours. It's easier to kind of see here where we're at. If we zoom in, still not a lot of liquidation below the price, right? So for the most part, there's not a lot of longs in the market right now, which is exactly why it's pulling back. It's pulling back because Bitcoin, but there's a lot of reasons why, just people are just sell right now. That's pretty much the bottom line. Other than that, when it comes to the 4-hour time frame, we have significant divergences. There's no confluence below the price outside of that point of control at 125. So once more, we do see two things here, which is kind of positive. These are the areas you want to focus on. The CME gap once more is at 125 to 126. Just kind of give you perspective, this is roughly where the CME gap's at. And if we look at the point of control, 124 is also that area of support based on volume from previous ranges, right? So it kind of lets us know ever since the last 2 months roughly worth of price action, we see the most amount of volume accumulation at 124, and we have a CME gap at 125. So that kind of reinforces the 124 to 126 range for me mentally, that is as an area of confluence that I'd be interested in taking along. Right? We're getting really close to that already. We're at 126 and some change. But if Bitcoin, the bottom drops out for Bitcoin, we're going to see a much more precipitous pullback here for Solana, and it's going to get ugly real fast. So I'd recommend waiting to see if we get a good consolidation in that 124 to 126 range. If that level is broken, we'll reevaluate. But between now and then, try not to catch falling knife, folks. It's not really the most advantageous scenario to do that, okay? And if you jump into a short, be careful too, because we could very well see a quick little pump back up there as soon as Bitcoin starts to stabilize and get a little bit more volume injected, all right? So that's kind of my thoughts there. What are yours? Love to hear it. Why don't you comment below? All right, folks, taking a quick look here at SUI, I want to reinforce first and all, before we actually get started here, just how important it is to maybe consider waiting for confirmation. The areas we're going to be focusing on today are previous highs and lows, kind of these support ranges. They're not magical Fibonacci retracement levels. They're not wondrous little things. They're just areas of confluence that we've seen volume and liquidation kind of combined together in those ranges, right? And that's generally how you find favorability, is to kind of just focus on what the market makers are looking at and to go with previous points of control and open interest, which we'll look at here in just a second. But to clarify, SUI is pretty similar in behavior, and actually worse, of course, if you look at the patterns versus Bitcoin, right? So we saw Bitcoin kind of rally up and lose its top, or we saw SUI just kind of lower high, lower low, just not really deciding it wants to recover whatsoever. So just be mindful that the pairing here is not very good. I know it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out, but it's an important foundation of just kind of understanding how the coin you're wanting to trade is behaving versus the market, which the market is Bitcoin, basically, in crypto. That's the bottom line. All that being said, SUI is resistance, or basically the point of control. Same thing, is 155. So we see a relief rally. That's going to be a good take profit target if you want to consider a long. I'm not saying you should do that, just saying in general, that's going to be a resistance. So you want to consider securing profits, or maybe with a retest that range, maybe consider a short. All right, that's generally what I like to do. I like to trade bearish back tests of previous support ranges that are now resistances. Obviously, the inverse as well on the upside. When it comes to liquidation delta, a lot. We got $250 million in liquidation delta, letting us know that further downside makes a lot more sense. The bears are in control. Areas to pay attention to: 135, 140, 145, 150. We see these concentrations at these round numbers, right? So just know every 5 cents below the price right now, we're going to see these new areas hit, or at least potentially hit. Of course, obviously, if it continues lower, but those are areas that the market makers see that a lot of people have. Tom, Dick, and Harry has $187 million in long liquidation delta at 144. Let's go ahead and sweep that level, right? That's essentially what market makers do. It's unfortunate, but it's kind of par for the course. So I hate to be the person that claims that market manipulation is the reason why we see all this nonsense, but it has a lot to do with it. It's a foundation, but it can also be work to your advantage too, right? So these things, instead of pissing and moaning about it, we generally like to use this knowledge as power, and oftentimes that's why the success rate is quite high with our trades, just because we kind of base them off of these metrics. Now, when it comes to support and resistance, just kind of give you some foundational knowledge here on where we're at with the most recent range. Just say, we can even zoom out here all the way from November till now. We see the most amount of volume above the price, right? So the value average, basically, or volume average, is 155. That's that point of control. We saw that as well as open interest here locally. So 155 kind of has that target on its back for, I would say, a resistance range now that we're below it, okay? When it comes to support, we got a previous high, basically closures, that was never truly retested at 148, which we're doing that pretty much right now. So there's a solid chance we do kind of bottom out here if Bitcoin can stop pulling back. Inverse as well, if we continue a bit lower, the worst case scenario, kind of like an area of confluence, is 135. That was kind of that lower range of support. Keep in mind, these are all areas here for us. Look, 135 is on that liquidation, 140, 145. So the easy way to understand it is this 135 to 150 range is a solid area of support for us. So whether or not we range in there or we spend very little time in there, there's a good chance that we're not going to go tremendously lower than 135. Once more, because there's not a lot of incentive to go too much lower once we get there. So those are just kind of some things to think about. SUI is no perfect coin right now. No coin is, honestly. Most are just struggling pretty hard. So that's just kind of the bottom line. I hope these levels help you, and we look forward to seeing the next one. Thanks so much again for liking the videos and or commenting below. Let me know your thoughts on SUI. Do you trade this coin, or is it just something you kind of avoid? I try to avoid it if I can, but I love trading it. It's kind of one of those high risk trades that I take on occasion. All right, thanks again. All right, folks, let's take a quick look here at XRP and kind of see where we're at. Oh man, I bet those moon boys are hurting today. When it comes to the overall circumstance, so once again, 195 is kind of that previous high range that was never truly retested as a new low. So even though we were below it technically on the 4-hour time frame, we still haven't closed below it on the daily yet. So let's not get too ahead of ourselves and think we're just going to go to the ground floor. But most coins are responding poorly to Bitcoin's correction right now, and it's important to recognize that XRP is no exception. In fact, it's kind of weird that how the price action worked. If we zoom in here, we can kind of see. Let's look if we can get roughly the same time frames pulled up. We can kind of see here that there's a similarity between XRP and Bitcoin, right? Now, granted, when Bitcoin bounced off that 92K range, we saw a significant correction for XRP too. So it did perform well, but right now it's pretty much aligned one to one ratio. So if Bitcoin keeps going down, XRP will too. Okay, so there's no other way around it. It's no sugarcoating this. It pretty much sucks right now with the rest of the market. All that said, areas of interest here, what we can see 205 is kind of that range. So hypothetically, the price recovers for XRP, we can presume we're going to see a lot of resistance at 205. Okay, and we saw that initially too, right here where the previous wick up to that 203 range happened, and then the price pulled back lower. All that said, liquidation delta is quite high, $500 million, which tells us that the bears are absolutely in control, and there's just a little bit of liquidation left at 190. Okay, that's kind of the macro liquidation there for us, or more so the 7-day liquidation. Why don't we actually, let's do this here. Let's look at the last 30 and kind of see what that liquidation looks like too, just so we can get some perspective here on where we're at. Biggest chunk of liquidation is at 180. That's actually the macro liquidation for us here. So I'd say a worst case scenario for the short term here this week, if Bitcoin continues to progress towards 87.5, 86,000, which is a distinct probability we lose 90K, 180 is that next area of confluence. Okay, so just know we see a lot of potential for 180. I'd be interested loosely right now in a long 180 as a rough estimate. We can see a point of control at 187. That's kind of the macro structure there ever since December of this of last year. Of course, we can recognize that is kind of that area that we see the most amount of volume. So 180 to 187 seems like a support range for XRP. Daily time frame. Let's double check this here. Obviously, we are significantly diverging. We're at 1, 2, 3, 4. We've been moving down for about 5 or 6 days straight. So we still can go lower, don't get wrong, but we're probably likely to see some slowing pressure leading into the weekend. In other words, 2 or 3 more days at the end of the week, we'll be at that overextended state, and I would think that a relief rally would make sense at that point. Having said that, daily time frame blows. There's no other way around it. All coins look terrible on the daily time frame, including Bitcoin, and the 4-hour time frame is no joke either. It really just lets us know that we're really overextended, and the likelihood of a correction higher is greater, but I don't think it's going to happen right away. Okay, so it's best to presume we're going to go lower before we go higher. I would say 187 to 185 seems much more sensible, as long as Bitcoin continues lower, which it does look like it wants to do that. Okay, so just kind of not the greatest market conditions, but that's just the market we trade in, right, folks? It's just kind of how it goes sometimes. Likely some fundamentals causing this to occur. I know there's some weird stuff going on right now, but for the most part, from a technical standpoint, there's no reason to consider longs just yet. I think further downside should be expected based on the overall way that things are going. Okay, at least the safer trader would be waiting for a better opportunity right now and not forcing a trade. And that's what I'd recommend for you. So those are my thoughts. What are yours? Comment below. Let me know. Love to hear it. Friendly reminder to our traders, we got a 15% trading discount using my link below to register for Bitunix. You'll also automatically be eligible for future trading competitions through this exchange. It's an excellent exchange. There's no KYC required. Be sure to use my link down below to register. All right, folks, quick look here at Chainlink, kind of seeing what's going on. I got a lot of requests for this one, so I just want to update you quickly and kind of let you know that we got our point of control here with this recent range from December, right? Roughly about a month's worth of trading. We have the most amount of volume at 1240. We're below that right now, but that just kind of suggests that we got some support. We're entering that support range, and that could be a positive sign here. Bitcoin bottoms out at 90K. We may see capitulation or a bounce. But the key takeaway here is that Link is not looking great like most of the market is at this point too. So it's not like this coin's any exception. It's not like going to go straight up or straight down because of this. But what we want to identify is just some key levels to focus on so you understand kind of where we're at. First of all, pretty significant overextension for Chainlink, much more so than Bitcoin. But for the most part, most coins look like that right now. So there's nothing super amazing here with Chainlink versus Bitcoin. And then if we do take a look at the backend data, let's go ahead and pull up the correct chart there. We're going to recognize that the point of control should be above the price action now. And what that basically just means is, that level of 1380, that was that previous area of control. There's no more control there, right? That was that resistance here range recently. So future reference, we travel into the upper 13s. Just be mindful that 1390 to roughly 1420 is kind of that area of resistance above the price. That's that point of control above the price. All that being said, when it comes to liquidation short delta, we're at what, 1/5 $1 billion, so about close to 200 million in shorts. And then we look at liquidation, there's not a lot of liquidation left to the downside. So my expectation is that we're going to see a short-term relief rally for this coin under the impression Bitcoin stops pulling back. That's literally the entire premise to my analysis today is if Bitcoin stops pulling back, these coins would be fine, right? That's pretty much the overall summary there. But it's important to recognize there are certain areas to pay attention to. Local low here is about $12. So I would say, in considering a long at 12, between 12 and maybe just say 12.10 seems sensible right now, just based on the overall sense that these local lows haven't been broken yet. I think we've only seen one closure below $12 for this coin ever since November. Okay, so the odds of breaking below that is lower, but once more, stranger things can happen. Other than that, daily time frame sucks. 4-hour time frame is also pretty terrible. There's really nothing here to let us know that we're going to see some kind of hidden bullish divergence or some Elliott wave bull crap. You're really going to hear that from a lot of other people that are trying to they have an agenda, or they're probably somebody that doesn't really know too much about trading. Not to say I'm perfect by any stretch, but after 20 years in the market, I can tell you buying these kind of dips are extremely risky, and you're generally better off waiting for the bottom to be in before you consider a long. And while we never truly know when the bottom is in, we can identify it quicker and easier once we give it more time, right? This is just a straight line. There's no reason to try to take a long just yet, but based on confluence, the low $12 range would make sense if we see that here soon. Something to think about. All right, anyways, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Why don't you comment below? Love to hear it. Thanks again so much for being an awesome part of my life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.